He had everything. The most powerful force connection ever recorded in any living being. A master who believed he was destined to save the galaxy. A woman who loved him completely. A war he was winning. A future that should have been extraordinary. And then he lost all of it. Not because he was weak. Because he loved someone too much in a galaxy that had no way to protect that love. And the wrong person knew it. That is what this story is actually about. Not a hero who fell. Not a villain who was once good. Something far more specific and far more devastating than either of those things. This is the story of what happens when something born to be the greatest force for good the galaxy has ever produced is broken, piece by piece, by the one thing that was supposed to be unbreakable, his heart. There is a boy at the beginning of this story, 9 years old, a desert planet, 2 suns. He has never known a single free day in his entire life. He is a slave, and he believes, with everything he has, that one day things will be different, that one day he will be free, that one day he will come back and free his mother, that one day the galaxy will make sense. What happens between that boy and the black armor that the galaxy will one day learn to fear above almost everything else is the most heartbreaking story the Force ever told. And it starts exactly where you would not expect it to start. Not with war, not with darkness, with a promise. The desert planet of Tatooine was not a kind place to be born. It was a world that had been ground down by 2 suns and left to bake. A place where water was hoarded like gold, and where the criminal cartels of the Hutts served as the only real law. The Republic did not reach Tatooine. The Republic's protections, its institutions, its ideals about freedom and justice, none of it had ever made the journey out to that outer rim world. And so the people who lived there existed in whatever arrangement the Hutts permitted, which often meant existing in chains. Shmi Skywalker was a slave. She had been a slave for years before Anakin was born, passed from one owner to another as property, never as a person, never as a human being, deserving of dignity or choice. She was kind. Every account of Shmi describes a woman of extraordinary warmth and quiet strength, someone who found ways to love fiercely in a life that offered very few reasons to. And one day, without any father, without any biological explanation that anyone has ever been able to fully account for, she gave birth to a boy. There was no father. Shmi was certain of this. She had not been with anyone. The child simply was. He arrived as if the universe had breathed him into existence on its own, as if something vast and purposeful had reached into the living world and placed him there, in a slave's quarters, on a dust-swept planet at the edge of nowhere, and said, "Here is the one who was foretold, the one the ancient Jedi prophecy spoke of when it described a being who would bring balance to the Force. Here he is. His name is Anakin. He is sleeping in a bed made of scavenged materials. His mother is watching over him, and he has no idea what is coming." The early years of Anakin Skywalker's life on Tatooine were defined by 2 contradictory realities that somehow existed in him at the same time. On one side, there was slavery. He was property. He wore a chip inside his body that his owner could detonate if he tried to run. He worked long hours in a junk shop owned by a Toydarian named Watto, fixing machines, salvaging parts. doing whatever was asked of him without complaint, because complaint was a luxury no slave could afford. He knew from a very young age what it felt like to have no power over his own life. He knew what it felt like to be worth less than the machines he repaired. But on the other side, there was something else, something burning inside him that the chains could not quite reach. He dreamed. He built things from scraps and spare parts, complicated things, beautiful things that should not have been possible given what he had to work with. He built a droid. He built a pod racer. He could feel the movement of the air while he was racing, could sense it in a way that went beyond normal human perception, as if the world was speaking to him in a language no one had taught him, and he simply understood it naturally. His reflexes were inhuman. His instincts were beyond anything a child his age had any right to possess. The Force moved through him at a density and a depth that had never been recorded in any living being. Not once. In the entire history of the Jedi Order, in all their centuries of training and testing and searching, they had never encountered midichlorian counts like the ones flowing through that child's blood. He did not know any of this, of course. He was 9 years old, and he lived in a desert, and he was owned by someone. He had a mother he loved beyond all measure, and a dream of becoming a pilot and a gentle hope, small and carefully tended, that someday things might be different. That was the whole of Anakin Skywalker at the beginning. A boy, a slave, a dream, and inside him, unbeknownst to anyone on that planet, the most powerful connection to the Force that had ever existed in any living creature. When Qui-Gon Jinn arrived on Tatooine, he was not looking for Anakin. He was not looking for anyone in particular. He was there because a Queen's ship needed a hyperdrive component, and Tatooine was the closest option. He ended up in Watto's junk shop, attempting to negotiate, and finding that the Toydarian's mind was immune to the Jedi persuasion techniques he usually relied upon. And then a sandstorm came, and a small boy offered shelter to the strangers, and something shifted. Qui-Gon was a Jedi, unlike many of his contemporaries. He trusted the living Force in ways that the Jedi Council found uncomfortable, even reckless. Where others saw procedure, Qui-Gon saw the will of the Force moving through events like a current through water. Where others saw a child of unclear origin in a junk dealer's shop, Qui-Gon saw something else. He saw the way Anakin moved. He heard the way Anakin talked. He watched the way the boy's hands worked over machinery as if the parts were extensions of his own body. And then he tested Anakin's blood, and the results came back. And even Qui-Gon, who had seen remarkable things in his decades as a Jedi Knight, went quiet for a moment. The midichlorian count was impossibly high, higher than anything in the Order's records, higher even than Yoda, the Grand Master who had trained Jedi for 800 years. Whatever Anakin Skywalker was, he was something the galaxy had not seen before, something the Force itself seemed to have produced deliberately. And Qui-Gon, with the absolute certainty of a man who had spent his entire life listening to the Force's quiet suggestions, believed he understood what that meant. This was the Chosen One. This was the being the ancient prophecy had foretold, the one who would emerge in the galaxy's hour of need and bring balance to a Force that had been tilted toward darkness for longer than most could remember. Qui-Gon went to Shmi that night and told her what he believed. She listened to him in silence, the way a mother listens when someone is describing a future for her child that she already half knows is real and half prays is not. And then he told her that he wanted to take Anakin with him, that he believed the boy should be trained as a Jedi, that he was possibly the most important being alive. Here is the first heartbreak. Here, in this quiet room in the desert, before any lightsaber has been ignited, before any battle has been fought, or any empire has risen, Shmi Skywalker looked at her son, and she made the choice that no parent should ever have to make. She told Anakin to go. She told him that this was his chance, the one she could not give him herself. She told him that she was not sad for him going, but that she was happy for what he was becoming. And she smiled, and she held him, and she let him leave. And she watched the ship rise into the sky above the desert and disappear into space. And she was alone, and she remained a slave. Anakin left Tatooine, having made a promise to his mother. He told her he would come back. He told her that he would free her. He said it with the absolute conviction of a child who does not yet know how many promises the galaxy has a way of breaking. He meant every word. He held onto those words for years afterward, carried them with him through every day of his training, through every lesson and every sparring session, and every moment when the Jedi life felt foreign and cold to someone who had come from the warmth and dust of a desert home. He was going to come back. He was going to free her. This was the promise. The Jedi Council on Coruscant looked at Anakin Skywalker, and they did not see what Qui-Gon saw. Or rather, they saw it, and it frightened them. Yoda in particular, that ancient, small figure who had navigated the currents of the Force for longer than most civilizations had existed, looked at the boy and sensed what Qui-Gon sensed. The power was undeniable. But Yoda also sensed something else. He sensed fear, not in the abstract or the philosophical, but fear in the most personal and immediate sense. A boy who was afraid of losing things. A boy who had already lost so much and could not bear to lose more. The fear was not evil. The fear was human. The fear was the fear of any person who has been stripped of everything and finally given something worth keeping and cannot stand the thought of it being taken away again. The council refused to train him. They said he was too old, 9 years of age, and the Jedi Order said he was too old to learn, too set in his attachments, too shaped by a life they had not supervised. They said the fear in him was dangerous. They said the right thing to do was to send him back. Qui-Gon refused. Qui-Gon stood before the entire council and told them that he was going to train Anakin whether they approved it or not. This was extraordinary. This was the kind of defiance that made the council deeply uncomfortable. But Qui-Gon was certain. He had never been more certain of anything. And then Naboo happened, and Qui-Gon fought a Sith warrior in the reactor room of that palace, and the fight went through doorways that opened and closed in sequence, and for a moment the doors separated them, and Qui-Gon knelt and breathed and composed himself. And then the doors opened again, and Darth Maul was waiting, and Qui-Gon was impaled through the chest by a red blade, and he fell to the floor, and he did not get up. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon's apprentice, who had been watching from behind the second door, with everything in him screaming, cut Darth Maul in half, in a burst of anguish, and then ran to his dying master. And Qui-Gon, in the last breaths left to him, said one thing: "Train the boy. Promise me. Train him," Obi-Wan promised. The council, out of deference to a fallen master and in recognition of what had just occurred, relented. Anakin would be trained, not because they were certain it was wise, not because they had resolved their reservations. They had not. Those reservations would color everything that followed, every interaction Anakin had with that institution, every moment when he came to them with his doubts and his struggles and found instead a wall of careful watchfulness rather than open arms. But he would be trained, and so the boy who had been a slave on the edge of the galaxy was brought into the oldest and most prestigious order of warriors and peacekeepers the Republic had ever known. He was placed under the care of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was young himself and who had just lost his master, and who had made a promise he was now obligated to keep. Their relationship was, from the very beginning, shaped by that fact. Obi-Wan was not Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon had chosen Anakin because he believed in him with his whole heart. Obi-Wan chose Anakin because he had promised to. He grew to love him, truly and deeply. As the years passed, that love became one of the most profound bonds in Obi-Wan's life. But in the beginning there was duty, and the ghost of his master, and a child who needed more than duty could give. Anakin grew. He grew tall and strong and extraordinarily gifted. His natural abilities with the Force surpassed almost everyone around him in ways that should have been impossible given his age. He flew with instincts that could not be taught. He fought with a creativity that formal training struggled to accommodate. He felt the Force the way other people breathe air, constantly, without effort, a living tide moving through and around him that he could shape and read and channel without apparent strain. His fellow Jedi younglings had been trained from infancy in the arts of stillness and meditation and detachment. Anakin had been trained in survival, and survival had made him sharper in some ways and far more vulnerable in others, because Anakin could not detach. He was constitutionally incapable of the emotional distance the Jedi considered fundamental to wisdom. When he cared about something, he cared about it with everything he had. When he feared losing something, the fear consumed him. When he was angry, the anger was total, immediate, and ferocious. He felt everything at the extreme edges of human experience. Every joy brighter and every sorrow darker than most people ever reach in a lifetime. The Jedi saw this as a flaw to be corrected. They counseled him about attachment. They advised him to let go. They told him that love was not forbidden but possession was. That caring was acceptable but needing was not. That he must learn to open his hand and release what he held. They were not wrong, exactly. But they were also delivering this counsel in the manner of people who had never been slaves. They had never been property. They had never had the single person in the world who loved them exist in chains on a planet they could not return to. They had never grown up knowing that everything could be taken from them at any moment, that they had no legal rights, that their lives belonged to someone else. The Jedi's philosophy of non-attachment was built on a foundation of security they had always possessed. Anakin had never had that foundation. He was being asked to build a house without a floor. He tried. He truly tried. He was not lazy or indifferent toward his training or contemptuous of the Jedi's wisdom. He wanted to be what they needed him to be. He wanted to earn the trust of the Council that had been so cautious about him from the beginning. He wanted Obi-Wan to be proud of him the way Qui-Gon had believed in him. He wanted to belong to this family he had been brought into, to feel like a Jedi, in the same complete and unambiguous way. The others seem to feel it. But belonging is hard when every room you walk into, the people in it still see the boy who should have been sent back to the desert. 10 years passed between Tatooine and the next chapter of Anakin's story. And then a senator named Padme Amidala received a death threat, and everything changed. Padme was the girl from the ship. She had been a queen when Anakin met her as a child, and he had looked at her with the wide eyes of a 9-year-old who had never seen anything so extraordinary. And he had told her that she was an angel, which is what the deep space pilots called the luminous beings, said to live on the moons of Iego. She had smiled at him. She had been kind to him. And in the way that the young and the lonely and the starved for warmth can be shaped by single moments of kindness, Anakin had never forgotten her. She was a senator now. She had grown into someone formidable, passionate, and intelligent, and utterly committed to the causes she believed in. Someone whose voice in the Senate carried the weight of genuine conviction, and someone wanted her dead. And so, the Jedi Council assigned Obi-Wan and his now-grown Padawan to protect her. And Anakin saw her again. He was not 9 years old anymore. He was 20. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and wearing the robes of a Jedi apprentice. And the moment he saw her, he went completely still inside, in the way that people go. Still when they realize something is happening to them that they cannot stop, and that will change them permanently. He was not subtle about it. He was not capable of subtlety when it came to Padme. He told her that he had thought about her every day for 10 years. He stared at her with an intensity that she found overwhelming, that she pulled back from, because she was a senator and he was a Jedi and the complications were self-evident. But she was not unmoved. She remembered him too. They were sent to Naboo together, while Obi-Wan investigated the assassination plot. And on Naboo, among the waterfalls and the meadows and all the gentle beauty of that world, something happened between them that was inevitable and impossible in equal measure. They fell in love. Or rather, the love that had been building in Anakin for a decade finally found purchase in Padme as well. She resisted it. She named the obstacles clearly and honestly. She was a senator. He was a Jedi. The Jedi did not permit romantic attachment. Their lives were already complicated beyond most people's ability to manage. She pulled back, and then she came forward, and then she pulled back again, until finally she could not anymore. And in a garden, quietly, with no witnesses and no ceremony, she stopped fighting it. What they had was real. Whatever complications and theories and philosophical debates might be applied to their relationship from the outside, what they felt for each other was real. Padme was not a political convenience to Anakin. She was not a project or an obsession in the way that only moves in one direction. She was the person he loved, the person for whom he would have done anything. And that was exactly the problem. Because a man who will do anything for the person he loves is a man who can be moved by the threat of losing them. And there were forces in the galaxy that understood this, and were patient, and were waiting, before any of that waited future could arrive. However, there was a nightmare, and the nightmare was real. Anakin began having visions of his mother. Not peaceful dreams, not simple longing for the woman he had left behind on Tatooine, with a promise he had not yet kept. These were visions of suffering. His mother in pain, his mother in danger, his mother reaching out to him across whatever distance separated them, and him unable to reach back. He told Padme. She did not hesitate. They went to Tatooine. What he found there was not what he had hoped to find. Shmi had been living with a moisture farmer named Cliegg Lars, who had bought her freedom and fallen in love with her. She had been happy, or as close to happy as someone could be, who spent years waiting for a son who had promised to return. She had made a life. And then the Tusken Raiders, the fierce, nomadic people of Tatooine's deep desert, had taken her from that life. Klieg had organized a rescue party, and the raiders had devastated them, killing many. He himself had lost a leg. They had been forced to abandon the search. Anakin went into the desert alone. He followed the Force, following the dim thread of his mother's presence, riding across the sand at night, through country where nothing gentle survived. He found the Tusken encampment. He moved through it without drawing attention, a shadow among shadows, until he found a tent at the edge of the camp. And inside the tent, he found his mother. She was barely alive. She had been tied to a frame, and she had been hurt for a long time. And she was barely alive when he cut her loose and held her in his arms. She looked at him. She recognized him. She said his name. She told him she was so proud of him, that he had become the person she always knew he would become. And then she closed her eyes, and she died in his arms. He held her. He held her in that tent, in the desert, on the planet where she had spent her whole life. And he could feel the moment when whatever connected him to her simply ended. He had promised to come back. He had promised to free her. He had come back, and she had died in his hands, and she had not been free. What happened next was something the Jedi would have called a failure. What happened next was something a psychologist might call a complete dissociative break, driven by grief and trauma and rage. What happened next was Anakin Skywalker going back out of that tent with a lightsaber in his hand. He killed every Tusken Raider in the camp, not the ones who had taken her, all of them, the warriors who had hurt his mother, the older people who had not participated, the children who could not have understood. Every single person in that camp was dead when he was done. The sand was dark, and the night was wide and silent, and he stood in the middle of it, having done something that could not be undone, knowing it could not be undone, and feeling something settle into him in the aftermath that was not peace and not relief and not grief, but something colder and more frightening than any of those things. He took his mother's body back to the Lars homestead. He helped bury her. And then he said the thing out loud that he had not yet said to anyone, the thing that had been growing in the dark inside him for years, the thing the Jedi feared when they saw his fear. He said that he hated them. He said that he was angry. He said that it was not supposed to happen this way, and that he would become so powerful that one day nothing could take the people he loved from him. He would not let people he loved die. Padme heard him say this. She held him while he said it. She did not tell him it was wrong. She did not quote Jedi philosophy. She just held him because she loved him. And because sometimes love means staying in the room while someone falls apart, even when the falling apart is frightening. Even when some part of you knows that the thing breaking apart in front of you is something that will not go back together the same way it was before. He told the council none of it. He could not. A Jedi confessing to a massacre would have ended his training, ended his role in the Order, ended everything. And so he carried it. He put it somewhere inside himself and built walls around it and kept walking. He was good at carrying things. He had been carrying things his whole life, but this was heavier than anything he had ever carried before. And he carried it on top of everything else, and it bent him in ways that would not become visible to anyone else for years, but that never stopped bending. The Clone Wars came. And in the wars, Anakin Skywalker found the one thing that the Jedi life and the sand and the grief had never given him. He found something he was extraordinarily good at. Not just good in the way that natural talent manifests, good in the way that a person becomes when their inner life has been generating tremendous pressure for years and finally finds an outlet proportional to that pressure. He became one of the greatest warriors the Republic had ever seen. He earned the nickname, the Hero with No Fear. He commanded the 501st Legion of Clone Troopers with a tactical brilliance that made him famous across entire star systems. He was beloved by his men in the way that commanders are beloved when they fight alongside their soldiers rather than above them, when they take the same risks, when they remember the names of the people they are responsible for, when they make it personal. Anakin made it personal. Everything Anakin touched, he made personal. That was both the source of his greatness and the thing that was going to destroy him. He took on a Padawan of his own during the wars, a young Togruta girl named Ahsoka Tano, who had been assigned to him without his asking, who he resisted at first and then embraced completely, who became in some ways the little sister he never had, another person to care about, another person to protect, another cord connecting him to the world that could be pulled. He was fiercely protective of Ahsoka, fiercely protective of his men, fiercely protective of Padme, who continued to serve in the Senate and continued to risk her life advocating for peace while a galaxy burned around her. He had married her, quietly, secretly, after Geonosis, before the Clone Wars fully consumed everything. No witnesses except a pair of droids. No ceremony recognized by the Jedi Order or the Republic Senate. Just the two of them and their words, and the enormity of what they were choosing to do in defiance of everything that was supposed to govern their lives. It was reckless. It was beautiful. It was the most purely Anakin thing he had ever done. Because Anakin had never been able to stop himself from wanting something simply because the rules said he should not have it. He carried this secret too. He carried the marriage, and he carried the massacre, and he carried the fear, and he carried the nightmares that were already starting to come, vague and formless at first, but gaining shape with every passing month. Dreams about something terrible happening to Padme, about losing her the way he had lost his mother, about being too late again, about reaching and finding nothing. The Clone Wars went on. Battles and victories and casualties and moral compromises that the Jedi and the Republic kept making in the name of survival, inch by inch, allowing the war to reshape them into something different from what they had always claimed to be. Anakin watched this. He was not naive. He saw the gaps between the Jedi's stated ideals and their actual behavior. He saw the Senate's corruption, the fear that drove decision after decision away from the principles the Republic claimed to embody. He saw it, and it frustrated him, and he had no vocabulary for what to do with that frustration except fight harder and hold tighter to the things he loved and refuse to let go. And all the while, a man named Palpatine was watching him, had always been watching him. From the very first moment Palpatine had encountered that 9-year-old boy on Naboo, when he was already the shadow behind the Trade Federation blockade and already engineering the chain of events that would propel him towards supreme power, he had seen what Qui-Gon had seen. He had seen the Chosen One. and he had understood immediately that the Chosen One was not a threat to his plans. The Chosen One was the plan. Palpatine had been patient. He had been cultivating Anakin for over a decade with the precision of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. He presented himself as a mentor, as a friend, as the one adult in Anakin's life who did not lecture him about his emotions, who did not caution him about his attachments, who listened to his frustrations with the Council and agreed with them, who made him feel understood in the way that only people who are specifically trying to manipulate you can make you feel understood. Because understanding is their instrument. He told Anakin that the Jedi did not appreciate his gifts. He said this quietly, with the tone of someone sharing a painful truth they wish were not true. He told Anakin that the Council used him without trusting him, that they feared his power even as they directed it toward their own ends. He pointed to the Council's refusal to grant Anakin the rank of Master when they placed him on that body as Palpatine's own representative. That particular humiliation, public and deliberate, had stung Anakin deeply. He had been placed on the most exclusive gathering of Jedi in the galaxy and told simultaneously that he was not worthy of the title it carried. Palpatine saw his reaction. Palpatine filed it away. Palpatine continued. He also told Anakin things about the Force that the Jedi had never told him. Or rather, he hinted at them. He told Anakin there were things the Jedi did not teach, things they kept from their students, either out of fear or out of self-interest. He told him there were aspects of the Force that did not conform neatly to the light and dark division the Order had always maintained. He described an ancient Sith named Darth Plagueis, a being so extraordinary in his mastery of the Force that he had discovered the ability to prevent death, to reach into the very mechanisms of life and preserve what would otherwise be lost. He described this quietly, as a story, as history, as something interesting and ancient. He let the words settle into Anakin the way a stone settles into still water, without drama, without urgency, just the stone and the ripples. He did not say the quiet part loudly. He did not need to. He knew that Anakin was already dreaming about Padme dying. He knew because Anakin had told him. In one of those late-night conversations in Palpatine's private office, where the war seemed very far away and the Chancellor seemed like the only person in the galaxy who wanted to listen, he knew about the nightmares. He knew about the fear. He knew because everything Anakin had told him over years of careful, patient, deliberate friendship was information, and Palpatine kept all of it. And when the time came to use it, he knew exactly where to aim. The nightmares about Padme had started the way most nightmares start. Indistinct and fragmentary, images without full narrative, feelings more than scenes. But as time passed, they became clearer and more detailed and more insistent. He saw her in pain. He saw her dying. He saw the moment of loss approaching and himself unable to stop it, standing with his hands open and nothing in them. These were not random anxiety dreams. He had learned from his mother's death that Force visions of this kind were real, that they showed things that would happen unless something changed. He had tried to change things for his mother and arrived too late. He was not going to arrive too late for Padme. The fear spread through him like poison in water, invisible and pervasive. He could not concentrate on the things the Council asked of him without the fear underneath everything, a constant low-frequency hum that never stopped. He could not look at Padme without calculating the time he might have left with her. He could not sleep without the nightmares returning. He was unraveling, and he was trying desperately to keep anyone from seeing it, and he was failing. When he went to Yoda, because even in this state, even with everything, some part of him was still reaching toward the light, reaching toward the people who were supposed to help. He sat before the ancient Grand Master, and he described what he was feeling without naming names. He described the fear of losing someone he cared about. And Yoda told him that death is a natural part of the living force, that mourning what is lost is natural, but that seeking to hold on beyond what the force permits leads only to suffering. He told Anakin to train himself to let go of everything he feared to lose. He told him that attachment is not the same as love, and that to love something truly is to wish it peace even in its ending. These were wise words. They were genuinely wise. And they offered Anakin Skywalker absolutely nothing, because Anakin did not need philosophy in that moment. He needed someone to sit with him in the fear. He needed someone to say that what he was feeling was understandable, given everything he had been through. That losing his mother the way he did would mark anyone permanently. That needing the person you love to survive is not a character flaw, but a human reality. He needed compassion, not counsel. He needed warmth, not wisdom. And the Jedi, for all their extraordinary gifts, had spent so many centuries perfecting the posture of equanimity that they had somewhat forgotten how to simply be present with someone who was drowning. Palpatine knew how to be present. Palpatine had been practicing for exactly this moment for years. The galaxy was moving toward its climax. The war was ending. General Grievous had been located, and Obi-Wan was sent to Utapau to deal with him. Anakin was not sent. Anakin was left on Coruscant, which meant Anakin was close to Palpatine, which was exactly what Palpatine needed. And then Palpatine told Anakin that he was a Sith Lord. He said it in the Opera House. He said it calmly, because Palpatine did everything calmly. Calmly was the skin he wore over everything he actually was. He told Anakin that he was Darth Sidious, that he had been all along, that the war had been his design from the beginning. He said it, and then he waited. Anakin was devastated. He was furious. He was shaking. He went immediately to Mace Windu and told him, and then he stood and waited, while the most powerful strike team the Jedi Council could assemble went to arrest Palpatine. And the minutes passed, and the fear about Padme was still there. And the thing Palpatine had told him about Darth Plagueis was still there. The ability to prevent death, to save the person you loved from the very fate you dreamed about every night. Palpatine had said he knew the power. He had said the Jedi would never teach it because they considered it unnatural. He had said many things, and now he was about to die or be imprisoned. And whatever he knew, whatever knowledge existed in him about how to cheat death and keep Padme alive, would go with him. Anakin ran. He arrived at Palpatine's office to find Mace Windu standing over the Chancellor with a lightsaber raised, ready to deliver the final blow. And Palpatine, bleeding and hunched and suddenly appearing very old and very destroyed, looked at Anakin with eyes that were ancient and patient and knew exactly what they were doing. He said that he was too weak to save Padme, that he needed Anakin. He appealed not to Anakin's ideology or his ambitions, or his frustrations with the Jedi. He appealed to love. He appealed to the one thing that Anakin Skywalker had never been able to walk away from. Mace Windu moved to strike. And Anakin moved first. He cut off Mace Windu's sword hand. He did not plan it. He did not make a rational calculation. He did not choose between the Jedi Order and Palpatine in that moment, in any considered philosophical sense. He chose Padme. He chose the person he could not lose. He chose the promise he had made himself after the desert, the promise that he would never be too late again, that he would find a way, that he would become powerful enough to keep the people he loved alive. He chose that promise in the only way a man who has just cut off someone's hand can choose anything. Instantly, irreversibly, Mace Windu fell from the window. The lightning took him, and Palpatine straightened, slowly, and the destroyed quality left his face and was replaced by something else. And Anakin knelt, and Palpatine gave him a name. Darth Vader. He said the name. He heard it. He accepted it. Not because he had become evil, not in that moment, not fully, but because he had made a choice. And the choice had a momentum that was going to carry him now regardless of what he wanted. And because whatever he was going to be from this point forward was not something that had a good name. And Darth Vader was the name that was offered. So it was the name he wore. What followed was the Night of the Jedi. Order 66. The command sent to every clone trooper across the galaxy. A trigger planted in their altered genetic code, executing without hesitation, without question, without the individual soldiers having any idea that they were acting on anything other than their own will. The Jedi who had fought alongside their clone brothers for 3 years of brutal and costly war died in the field, ambushed by the people standing next to them. And on Coruscant, in the Jedi Temple that had stood for millennia as the center and symbol of everything the Order stood for, Anakin Skywalker led the 501st through the doors, into the halls where he had walked as a student, where he had been trained, where he had quarreled with masters and sparred with fellow Padawans, and sat in the archives trying to understand who he was supposed to become. He walked those halls again, but this time the 501st walked with him. And this time the people inside were not prepared for what was coming. He fought his way through the temple. He cannot have been unaffected. He was not a machine. Not yet. He must have recognized faces, names, voices calling out in confusion and fear and disbelief that the person leading this assault was the person they knew. There are some things that do not survive being described completely. Some moments where the full picture is too large for any accounting to hold. The Night of the Jedi Temple is one of them. What happened inside those walls is the kind of thing that cannot be undone and cannot be fully looked at and cannot be moved past. Anakin Skywalker walked into the place that had been his home, and he killed the people inside it. That is the sentence. There is no version of that sentence that is not devastating. There were younglings, children who ran to him when they realized what was happening, who came to him because he was Anakin Skywalker, the hero without fear, the one who was supposed to protect them. A small voice asked him what they were going to do, and the blade ignited, and the children of the Jedi Order died in their own temple, with the stars still burning outside the windows. This is the moment that cannot be recovered from, not in the conventional sense, not as a story about a man who made bad decisions and found his way back. This is the event that sits at the center of the tragedy and does not move and does not soften and cannot be explained away by manipulation or fear or grief. Whatever Palpatine did, whatever the Jedi failed to give him, whatever the prophecy demanded, the children were children, and they were killed by the person who was supposed to be the chosen one, the one who was supposed to bring balance, the one the Force itself had supposedly breathed into existence for a purpose. He killed them. Anakin Skywalker, the boy from the desert, who had once built a droid out of scrap parts and dreamed of being a pilot, killed children in a hallway of the Jedi Temple. That is part of the story. It has to be part of the story. He then went to Mustafar. He was sent there by Palpatine to deal with the separatist leadership, the people who had nominally been the enemy across 3 years of galaxy-wide war, though the truth was that they had always been Palpatine's instruments, moved across the board and now disposable. Anakin went to Mustafar, and he killed every one of them. He moved through that facility above the lava rivers with a calm efficiency that was its own kind of horror. Not the rage of the desert, not even the desperation of the temple. Something quieter, something that had passed through fire and come out the other side into a place where the normal human responses to what was happening had stopped registering. He stood at the edge of the viewing window looking out at the lava, and he called Padme. She came. Of course she came. She loved him. Whatever the theories say about the Force and its subtle influences, she loved him. And when the person you love calls you from a planet of fire and ash in the middle of the most catastrophic event in galactic history, you go. She came to Mustafar, and she told him what she saw. She told him that she knew what had happened at the temple, that she had heard, that she could not believe it, but she knew it was true. She looked at his eyes, and she could see what was different in them. She told him to come back. She told him it was not too late. She reached for him with everything she had, the same way you reach for someone you love, who is standing at the edge of something terrible, with your whole body and your whole heart leaning toward them, willing them back with every cell of you. And Obi-Wan stepped out of the ship, and Anakin's face changed. He had told Obi-Wan nothing about Padme. No one at the Jedi Order was supposed to know. But here was his former master, stepping off the ship that Padme had come in. And the only explanation his fractured mind could construct in that moment was that she had led him there, that she had brought the Jedi to him, that she had betrayed him. She had not. She would never have. She loved him. She had come alone except for her pilot, and she had not told anyone where she was going. Obi-Wan had followed her out of exactly the desperate hope that she could reach Anakin in a way that no one else could, that she could bring him back from wherever he had gone. He had hidden on her ship because he had believed she might be able to save his friend. But Anakin looked at Padme's face and then at Obi-Wan, and something in him that had been barely holding together gave way completely. He stretched out his hand and he began to choke her. He used the Force against the person he loved, against Padme, against the woman he had married in secret, the woman he had crossed the galaxy to protect, the woman whose face was in every nightmare, the woman he had sold his soul to keep alive. He choked her until she fell. And then he and Obi-Wan fought. They fought across Mustafar with everything that had ever been between them, the years of training and brotherhood and genuine love, all of it weaponized in the heat above the lava. Obi-Wan was crying. He was crying while he fought. He did not want this. He had never wanted this. He had promised a dying man he would train a boy, and he had trained the boy, and he had loved the boy. and the boy had grown into the most extraordinary being Obi-Wan had ever known. And now that being was trying to kill him above a river of fire on a planet with a sky the color of blood. Anakin was not crying. Not then. He was past that. He had gone somewhere beyond tears. Obi-Wan reached higher ground. He pleaded. He said that Anakin was his brother, that he loved him. He was begging, in everything except the literal word, for this to stop, for some last piece of the person he had known to emerge from whatever had taken his place and simply stop. Anakin leaped anyway. He attacked from below toward a higher position. The high ground was not symbolic. It was geometry. He could not make the angle. The blade came down, and he fell, and the flames came up. And he was on the bank of the lava river burning. Obi-Wan stood above him. He had the high ground, and he had his lightsaber. And the most pragmatic thing in the galaxy to do in that moment was finish it. Anakin was burning. Anakin was in agony. Anakin was still alive, barely. Still screaming his hatred up at his former master, still refusing to stop being what he had just become, even as the fire consumed him. And Obi-Wan could have ended it. He could not end it. He was not able to do the pragmatic thing. He was breaking apart in front of a burning man who was screaming at him, and he could not raise his weapon. He said something. He said that Anakin had been his brother. He said it in the past tense. And then he turned and took Padmé's unconscious body back to the ship and left. He left Anakin on the bank of the lava river, burning, alive. Palpatine arrived. He was always going to arrive. He had been tracking the whole situation from the moment Anakin left for Mustafar. He descended in his shuttle, and his red guards stood at the perimeter, and he walked across the ash toward the burning figure on the bank of the lava. And he knelt beside what was left of Anakin Skywalker, and he gathered him up, and he took him to Coruscant, and then began the rebuilding. What remained of Anakin's body was encased in black armor, fitted to the damage that the fire had done, which was nearly everything. His lungs could not function on their own. His limbs were gone. His face was gone. Whatever had once been recognizably his was replaced with machinery and plating, and a helmet that sealed out everything soft and human, and left only the mask. A mask that breathed. A mask that had eyes but expressed nothing. A mask that had a voice modulated by electronics into something deep and resonant and fundamentally inhuman. He lay on the table as they assembled the armor around him, piece by piece, and he could not move and could not speak and could feel the pieces being attached in the way that someone can feel things being done to a body that is no longer quite their own. And when it was finished, when the mask was sealed and the breathing started, the mechanical rhythm of it, in and out, in and out. The first sound he heard himself make was the sound the galaxy would come to know as the sound of death and dread. And then they told him about Padmé. Palpatine told him, with the composed regret of someone performing sorrow rather than feeling it, that Padmé had died, that her injuries had been too severe, that she was gone. The armor contained a scream that no one outside it could fully hear. In there, inside the black shell, something that had once been Anakin Skywalker made a sound that came from somewhere deeper than loss, from somewhere in the territory that does not have a name, because it is the place where grief and guilt and horror and self-knowledge collapse into each other and become something that cannot be called any one thing. He had tried to save her. He had done everything he did, The massacre and the betrayal and the murder of children and the ruin of everything he had ever loved or belonged to. He had done it all so that she would not die. And she had died. And the last thing he had done to her while she was alive was try to kill her with his own hand. He had not saved her. He had not been powerful enough. He had not been anything enough. And all of it had been for nothing. What happened to the remnant of Anakin Skywalker in that moment is the question the story spends the next 20 years refusing to answer directly. Vader walked out of that medical facility and went about the business of enforcing an empire. He was extraordinarily good at it. He was terrifying and effective and ruthless in the way that only someone who has already lost everything worth protecting can be ruthless. He hunted the surviving Jedi. He commanded fleets. He made examples. He was the armored fist behind the velvet authority of the Emperor, the thing the galaxy had learned to fear above almost everything else. But was Anakin Skywalker still in there? That is the question. That is the question that the tragedy balances on. Because if he was not, if the fire and the guilt and the armor had truly erased everything that the boy from the desert had been, then the story is horror without hope. If what walked through those corridors in black armor was simply a monster wearing the burned remains of a person, then there is nothing to mourn. Then it is only something to be afraid of. But if he was still in there, somewhere, buried under everything, the loss and the rage and the darkness and the years, then the story is something else entirely. Then the story is about what it takes to bury a person so completely that even they believe they are gone, and what it might take to reach them again. And that is a question Anakin Skywalker, in the decades that followed, did everything in his power to make sure no one would ever think worth asking. There is something particular worth dwelling on, something that tends to get lost in the larger catastrophe of the fall. During the Clone Wars, before everything came apart, Anakin Skywalker was one of the most genuinely loved figures in the Republic. Not just admired, loved, the kind of love that flows from soldiers who watch someone fight alongside them and risk the same things they risk and never ask anyone to go somewhere he would not go himself. The 500 and first followed him with devotion that went beyond military loyalty. They were his. He knew their names. He knew their histories, or what histories were permitted to exist for men grown in tubes and trained from birth for a war that was designed to consume them. He made them feel like people rather than instruments. He made them feel in the particular way that Anakin made everyone feel when he directed his full attention at them, like they were seen. This is the part that breaks something specific in you when you think about it carefully enough. Because those same men, those same individuals whose names he knew and whose lives he valued, were the ones who carried out Order 66. They turned on the Jedi without being able to help it. The chip in their heads overrode everything they were. And Anakin, who had become Darth Vader, led his own beloved 501st into the Jedi Temple. He led the men who loved him to do the worst thing any of them would ever do. The love could not protect them from what they were built to become, and the love could not protect them from him. This is what Palpatine understood, and the Jedi never quite did. He understood that Anakin's love was not a weakness to be eliminated. It was the mechanism, the very intensity of his love, the depth of it. The way he could not love anything halfway was the engine of his destruction. You do not turn someone like Anakin by attacking what he loves. You turn him by threatening it, by making the thing he loves the price of everything else, by positioning yourself as the only one who can protect it, and watching him do the rest himself. The Jedi saw his love as attachment and warned him against it. Palpatine saw his love as leverage and cultivated it. One of them was right about the danger, but being right about the danger and knowing what to do about it are two entirely different things. The Jedi named the problem without offering a solution that a human being could actually live inside. Palpatine offered a solution that no decent person could accept, but at least it was a solution. When you are drowning, you reach for whatever is close. It does not matter if it is a plank or a stone. You reach, Ahsoka knew. She was perhaps the one person in all the years of his training and his service and his war who was closest to understanding the whole of him. She was his Padawan, but she became something more than that. A peer in the ways that mattered. Someone who pushed back against him when the council would only nod carefully. She left the order before the end. She was falsely accused of a crime within the temple, and the council came very close to expelling her and handing her over to the Republic courts without certainly verifying her innocence. And it was Anakin who investigated and found the truth and cleared her name. And when the council offered to take her back, to restore her place as if nothing had happened, she walked away. She said the order was not what she had believed it to be. He watched her leave. He stood in the hall of the temple, and he watched the person he had trained and taught and protected walk away from the Jedi Order, because the Jedi Order had failed her. And something in his expression in that moment, if you could have seen it, would have told you everything about where things were going. He was not angry. He was not surprised. He was something quieter than either. He was a man who had just watched his student do the thing he had never been able to do himself. Leave. Choose herself. Walk away from the institution that used him without fully trusting him, that needed him without fully knowing him. Ahsoka could do that. Anakin could not. Anakin had nowhere else to be. The Jedi were the only home he had been given after the desert. And even a home that does not quite fit is still a home when you have known what it is to have none. He stayed. Of course he stayed. And Palpatine kept talking. And the nightmares about Padme kept coming. And the war kept grinding through lives, like a machine built specifically to grind through lives. And somewhere in the distance, though no one could see it from inside the moment, the clock was counting down. The ancient Jedi prophecy had said there would be a chosen one who brought balance to the Force. The Jedi had interpreted this as a champion of the light who would destroy the darkness. But prophecies are not always what their interpreters wish them to be. Balance does not necessarily mean the triumph of one side. Balance means equilibrium. Balance means that what is excessive gets reduced. And for 1,000 years before Anakin was born, the Jedi had existed as the dominant Force tradition in the galaxy, unchallenged, enormously powerful, deeply embedded in the institutions of the Republic, with hundreds of members active across thousands of worlds. The Sith, by contrast, had been two, master and apprentice, waiting in shadow. By certain measures, it was the Jedi who were the imbalance. No one has ever suggested the prophecy was meant to work this way. No one intended for the chosen one to be manipulated into becoming the instrument of the Jedi's destruction. But the Force is not a story told by any individual mind. It is something older and stranger, and more indifferent to individual preference than any being who has tried to understand it has been fully comfortable admitting. It moves where it moves. It does what it does. And perhaps what it needed in the particular calculus of its own vast purpose was not a hero. Perhaps what it needed was someone to break everything apart so that it could be rebuilt differently. Perhaps the balance required the fall. This does not make the fall acceptable. It does not make the children in the temple acceptable. It does not turn Anakin's crimes into anything other than what they were. But it adds a dimension to the tragedy that pure moral accounting cannot reach. A layer beneath the layer, a cosmic sadness that exists in parallel to the human one. He was the most powerful being in the galaxy. He was the one the Force had created for a singular and enormous purpose. And the manner of his creation, the circumstances of his life, the specific shape of his pain, had conspired with the precise calibration of a monster's patience to ensure that the fulfilling of that purpose destroyed him. There is no version of this story where Anakin Skywalker wins. There never was. The question was only always about what the destruction would cost and who it would eventually make free. The empire that rose from the ashes of the Republic was not built in a day. It was constructed carefully, piece by piece, over months and years, with the kind of deliberate architectural patience that only someone who has been planning for decades can manage. Palpatine was very good at building things. He was very good at making structures that looked like one thing from the outside while being something else entirely on the inside. The Empire looked like order. It looked like stability after the chaos of the Clone Wars, like a strong hand finally gripping the wheel of a galaxy that had been spinning out of control. Many people were relieved. Many people said that the Republic had become too corrupt, too slow, too beholden to competing interests to function, and that whatever replaced it at least had the clarity of a single purpose. Vader was that single purpose made visible. He was the Empire's answer to every question that ended in resistance. He was sent where the Emperor's will needed enforcing and where ordinary instruments were insufficient. He moved through the galaxy in his black ship with his black armor and his red blade. And wherever he went, things ended. Rebel cells, dissidents, former Jedi who had survived Order 66 and were trying to stay hidden, trying to find some corner of a transformed galaxy where they could exist without being found. Vader found them. He was extraordinarily gifted at finding people who did not want to be found, perhaps because he had once been someone who understood very well the geography of hiding things inside yourself. Perhaps because the darkness that had entered him could recognize its own trail in others. He served without apparent hesitation. From the outside, from the perspective of anyone watching Darth Vader operate across the first years of the Empire, there was no evidence of ambivalence, no softness, no moment where the black mask turned slightly away from what was being asked of it. He was efficient and remorseless, and the Emperor trusted him completely. Not because Palpatine was capable of trust in any meaningful sense, but because Vader was useful and controllable, and Palpatine had made sure of both those things before he ever let Vader walk out of that medical facility. The control was not only psychological, though it was partly that. It was also physical. The suit that kept Vader alive was designed with certain deliberate limitations. The components were chosen not merely for functionality but for dependency. Vader needed the suit. He needed the suit the way a drowning person needs the surface of the water. It was his lung and his skeleton and his skin. Without it, he lasted minutes. And Palpatine was the one who knew how to maintain it, who had overseen its construction, who held in his own hands the knowledge of how to keep his apprentice alive. This was not accidental. Palpatine did nothing accidentally. He had built a leash into the armor and called it medicine. So Vader served. He served because the alternative was death. And he served because there was nothing left that gave him a reason to choose death over service. There was nothing left to protect. There was nothing left to love. The person he had done everything for was gone, had died on Mustafar the same day that Anakin Skywalker had effectively died there. And what was left in the armor was something that had surrendered the right to peace. You do not get to choose peace when you have done what he did. You do not get to choose rest. You serve. You enforce. You go where you are sent, and you do what is asked, and you do not look too closely at what happens inside the helmet, because there is nothing useful in there. There is only the mechanical breath and the darkness and the things that cannot be undone. There are accounts, fragmentary and difficult to source, of what Vader was like in private. In the rare moments when the Emperor had no task for him, when the fleet was between deployments and the missions had paused. These accounts are not comforting. They describe a figure who did not rest in the way living beings rest, who stood or sat for hours in conditions of stillness that went beyond meditation, that looked more like a machine that had been switched to standby than a person who was thinking or feeling or existing in any continuous interior way, who spoke only when required to and then with the economy, of someone who found language itself an imposition, who had none of the small behaviors, the habits and preferences and tiny daily rituals that make a person recognizable as themselves over time. The Anakin who had built things from spare parts was gone. The Anakin who had raced pods across the desert and felt the air singing through his nervous system was gone. The Anakin who had loved with the terrifying completeness of someone who had learned love in a place that offered very little of it, who had put everything he was into every single person he cared about, was gone, or not gone, buried, somewhere under the armor, and the years and the accumulated weight of what he had done and what had been done to him. Something persisted, something that had not entirely extinguished. You cannot know this for certain by looking at Darth Vader from outside. You cannot infer it from behavior or word or action. You can only know it because of what happens later, because of what a teenager in a desert eventually makes possible. The first years of the Empire were devoted in significant part to the extermination of the Jedi who had survived Order 66. There were more than Palpatine had hoped. The clones had been efficient, and the suddenness of the betrayal had meant that very few Jedi had time to react. But some had survived nonetheless. Some had been off-world, in places where the signal reached the clone troops before the Jedi sensed the danger. Some had escaped through sheer luck, some through skill, some through the intervention of people who loved them more than they feared the new Emperor. Vader hunted them. He hunted them the way you hunt, when you know the territory intimately because you have lived there yourself. He knew how Jedi thought. He knew their training and their techniques and their reflexes. He had been one of them. He knew which mistakes they made under pressure and which strengths they fell back on when cornered. He was the worst possible enemy for a surviving Jedi to have, because he was everything they were, and then something else on top of it. Something forged in fire and loss that the Jedi Code had never prepared them to face. Some of the Jedi he encountered tried to reach him. This is documented. There were Jedi survivors who, when they came face to face with Darth Vader and recognized what was behind the mask, tried to speak to Anakin rather than fight Vader, tried to find the gap in the armor and put a voice through it. Some said his name. Some spoke to him about Obi-Wan, about the order they had shared, about the people they had both known. Some of them talked about Padme, and Vader killed them. He killed every one of them, quickly, in some cases, not quickly, in others. This could be read as pure cruelty. It could also be read as something more complicated. When someone who has walled off the most unbearable parts of themselves encounters something that threatens those walls, the response is rarely measured. The walls exist because what is behind them cannot be looked at. If you force someone to look at it, they do not usually respond with gratitude. They respond with the full force of everything they have been using to keep the wall up. Vader destroyed every person who tried to reach Anakin through him. Not necessarily because there was nothing to reach. Possibly because the reaching itself was the most dangerous thing of all. Obi-Wan was alive. Vader knew this. Or some part of what Vader was knew this, tracked it in the way you track something you cannot think about directly, but cannot stop being aware of. Obi-Wan had gone into hiding on Tatooine, of all places, the place where everything had begun. The desert, the twin suns, the planet that had given Anakin Skywalker to the galaxy, and then watched the galaxy make him pay for it. Obi-Wan was there, watching over a child, keeping himself quiet and small, staying out of history. Vader could have found him. He was gifted enough. He chose not to look. Or whatever process operated in him, instead of choice, made that particular search a low priority for reasons that were never articulated. He could not confront Obi-Wan. Not then. The confrontation with Obi-Wan was the confrontation with everything that had happened between them, and Vader was not ready for that confrontation. Perhaps was never going to be ready for it in the conventional sense, was only ever going to be capable of facing it sideways in the particular way that the people we have most profoundly loved and most profoundly failed can only sometimes be faced, when circumstances make avoidance impossible and you no longer have the energy to keep turning away. The Empire grew. The Imperial Senate debated. And then one day, it did not debate anymore because the Emperor dissolved it. Planetary governors were put in place. Systems that resisted were made examples of. The Death Star was built. In secret, and then not in secret. That vast technological weapon of such immense destructive power that its existence was meant to make resistance not just difficult but pointless. Why fight an empire that can simply erase the planet you are fighting from? There was a rebellion anyway. Of course there was. There is always resistance. This is one of the things that distinguishes people from the systems that try to control them. People keep reaching for something better, even when the calculus says they should stop, even when the math is terrible, even when the odds are so long they cannot be seriously calculated. The rebellion existed. It was small and fractured and poorly supplied, and it kept existing anyway. And among the rebels was a senator from Alderaan named Leia Organa, who had grown up in the gleaming courts of a peaceful world and had become one of the most determined voices in the cause for freedom the galaxy had ever produced, who carried plans for the Death Star inside a droid, and tried to get those plans to safety before Darth Vader caught her. He caught her. He took her aboard his ship, and he interrogated her, and she did not break. And he was not surprised by this, because he had always recognized people who could not be broken by ordinary pressure. He had been one himself, once, before something extraordinary enough was applied. He handed her over to the Imperial process and took the Death Star plans as his priority and went to Tatooine to find the droid that was carrying them. And on Tatooine, under those binary suns, he found instead the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. He found Obi-Wan Kenobi. The duel between them was nothing like the duel on Mustafar. On Mustafar, they had been two people who loved each other, destroying each other in grief and fury and everything that is available at the absolute limit of human feeling. This duel, years later, was quieter, almost ceremonial. Two old opponents finding each other again, at the far end of a long road, neither of them entirely what they had been when the road began. Obi-Wan moved like someone who was not particularly afraid of what was about to happen. Vader moved like someone encountering something he had not allowed himself to think about in a very long time. They spoke. Their words to each other were not the words of enemies who had always been enemies. They were the words of something much older and much more painful than enmity. Obi-Wan let himself be struck down. He raised his blade, and then he did not use it, and Vader's saber came through him, and the body beneath the robes vanished, and left only the cloth behind on the floor. He became one with the Force. It was a choice. It was a choice Obi-Wan made, because he understood things by then that the living Obi-Wan of 20 years earlier had not understood about what was needed, about what was coming, about a boy on a ship who needed a push from something larger than tactical advice. Vader looked at the empty robes on the floor and felt something. Whatever he felt, he did not show it. He stood there for a moment longer than the situation required, and then he moved on. There was a battle to complete. There was a rebel base to destroy. There was an emperor whose will required fulfilling. The Death Star was destroyed by a pilot from Tatooine flying an X-Wing. A young man who had grown up under the same twin suns, who had looked at the same wide sky from the same desert world, who had the same instincts and the same reflexes, and something in the Force that Vader registered in the middle of the battle like a sound he had not heard in a very long time and could not at first identify. He felt this pilot through the Force in the targeting run. He had the young man in his sights. And then another ship came out of the sun and blasted his wingmen and sent his own fighter spinning off into space. And the Death Star exploded, and the young pilot was gone. But Vader had felt something. He had felt it clearly and unmistakably. And he was Darth Vader, which meant that he did not ignore things his instincts told him were significant. He began asking questions. He began in the particular methodical way that Vader approached everything, pulling on the thread. The answer came to him in pieces. The pilot's name was Luke Skywalker. Skywalker. The moment of recognition must have been extraordinary in its devastation. To think about what Vader felt when he learned that name, when the implication settled into him, you have to go back to what he believed. He believed Padme had died on Mustafar. He believed she had died before the children were born, or that they had died with her, because no one told him otherwise. And Palpatine certainly had no interest in telling him. He had believed for years that he had no children, that whatever future he might have generated as Anakin Skywalker had ended on the same night he did, that there was nothing of him left in the world except the armor and what it served. And now there was a boy named Skywalker. What does it do to a person who has spent years armoring themselves against feeling anything to discover that there is something in the world that is theirs, that survived, that exists in the galaxy, breathing, living, fighting for something, carrying a name that is also his name? The question is impossible to answer from inside the armor. It is impossible to know what Vader did with this information in the privacy of whatever passed for privacy in his existence. But something changed. Something that had been completely still began to move. Slowly, incrementally, like ice at the beginning of a thaw that is so gradual you cannot see it happening, until suddenly the landscape is different. He did not tell the Emperor immediately. This fact alone is significant. In all of their years together, Vader had been transparent with Palpatine about operationally relevant information. He had reported everything that might affect the Emperor's plans. The existence of a Skywalker, of someone with that level of Force sensitivity fighting for the rebellion, was absolutely operationally relevant. Palpatine would have wanted to know. He had his own designs for Luke. As it would later become apparent, his own calculus about what a second Skywalker could be made into. Vader kept it to himself. He held the secret of his son's existence and did not offer it up. For some period of time, whatever duration it was, the knowledge of Luke Skywalker was something that belonged only to Vader. In the years that followed the Battle of Yavin, as the rebellion grew stronger and the Empire struggled to contain it, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader kept finding each other. The galaxy is very large, but the Force is not. The Force is a connection that exists outside geography, that can be felt across the distance between star systems by people who are attuned to each other in the particular way that Luke and Vader were attuned to each other, in the way that blood and bond and shared origin attune people whether they want it or not. Luke felt Vader. Vader felt Luke. And each time they were close, the awareness of the other grew sharper. Vader reached out to Luke through the Force. He was not subtle about it. He sent the message that he wanted to. He wanted Luke to turn. He wanted his son to come to the dark side, which was a thing Vader wanted, for reasons that were not entirely clear, even to whatever portion of himself was doing the wanting. Was it Palpatine's strategy being worked through him? Was it the Emperor's design to convert Luke just as Anakin had been converted? To add this new Skywalker to the arsenal of the dark side? Partly, certainly. But there was something else in Vader's pursuit of Luke that exceeded that strategic purpose. Something personal. Something that a being who had believed himself utterly without attachments was discovering he was not. The confrontation came on a planet of clouds and ice and commerce suspended in the atmosphere. A city that floated above a gas giant and pretended for a while that the war had not reached it. Luke went there because he saw his friends in danger in a vision. And he went despite being told by the voice of his dead master that it was a trap, that it was not yet time, that he was not ready. He went because he was Anakin Skywalker's son, and the one thing Anakin Skywalker's children inherited absolutely was the inability to stand still when the people they loved were in danger. They found each other in a carbon freezing chamber. They fought. Luke was skilled, more skilled than anyone watching from outside could have predicted for someone who had been training for such a short time. He fought with an instinct that went beyond what Obi-Wan and Yoda had taught him. A deeper inheritance, a cellular familiarity with how the Force moved through a fight that had been placed in him before he was even born by the man on the other side of the blades. They were, in their fighting, recognizably the same aggression, the same creativity, the same absolute refusal to stay still, to play defensively, to wait. Vader disarmed him. He was always going to disarm him. Luke was not ready. Vader cut off his hand, and Luke hung over the shaft of the city, and Vader stood above him and said the thing that changed everything. He said that Obi-Wan had not told Luke the truth about his father. He said that he was Luke's father. Luke's response was not acceptance. It was not a quiet moment of recognition or a tearful reunion across the darkness. He screamed that it was not true. He refused it. He said it was impossible. He said no, over and over, in the way that people say no when something is happening that they cannot stop and cannot accept and cannot incorporate into any coherent version of the world they understood themselves to be living in. Vader told him to come with him, to stop fighting and come with him, and together they could end the Emperor. He did not frame it as conversion to the dark side. He framed it in the way that Anakin Skywalker had always framed the most important things, as something about a person, not about ideology, not about power. He said they could end the Emperor together, father and son. He said it was Anakin Skywalker's destiny to end that man, to undo what he had done to the galaxy, and that he needed his son beside him to do it. Luke fell into the shaft rather than take his father's hand. He survived. He was pulled from the underside of the city by his friends and taken to safety. One hand gone and replaced later with a mechanical one, the same compromise with the body that his father had made on a far larger scale, and he lay for a while in the quiet of a medical bay and thought about what he had been told, about what it meant, about what to do next. The truth of it had settled into him despite his initial refusal. He could feel it in the Force. There was a connection between himself and Vader that was not the connection between enemies, and was not simply the connection between two Force users feeling each other across the distance. It was something that went through the blood and the bone and the Force all at once. Something that was its own category. And you did not need to be trained in the ways of the Force to recognize it once it was named. Vader was his father. Anakin Skywalker was his father. The man who had destroyed the Jedi Order, who had served the Emperor for decades, who was the most feared figure in the galaxy, was the man who had also given him life. Luke did not hate him. This is the extraordinary thing. This is the thing that separates Luke Skywalker from what the situation might reasonably have produced. He had every reason to hate. He had grown up an orphan on Tatooine, not knowing why. He had been told his father was a great Jedi who had been killed by Darth Vader, and had spent years holding that story, had built part of his identity on the heroism of that father and the villainy of that murderer. And then the murderer said he was the father, and Luke should have been destroyed by it. Should have become someone driven by the need to avenge a lie by destroying the man who made it. And instead, something softer happened. Something more difficult and more extraordinary than hatred. He believed his father was still in there. This was not rational. By any reasonable assessment of the available evidence, Darth Vader was what he appeared to be. He had killed Jedi. He had helped destroy a planet. He had tortured prisoners. He had served the Empire without visible hesitation for decades. He had cut off Luke's hand in the same conversation where he claimed to want to be close to him. The evidence for the ongoing existence of anything salvageable inside that armor was thin to the point of non-existence. But Luke believed it anyway. He believed it the way that some people believe things that they cannot prove and cannot rationalize, but that they know with a certainty that exceeds ordinary knowing. He believed that Anakin Skywalker had not been destroyed. He believed that whatever was inside the suit, under the darkness and the years and the armor, was not completely gone, and he decided that the most important thing he could do was reach it. Yoda told him, dying on Dagobah, with the peculiar tranquility of someone who had found their way out the other side of a very long life, that there was another Skywalker. And then Yoda died, peacefully, into the Force. 80 years of being the greatest living master of the light side, simply flowing out of him and back into the world. And Obi-Wan appeared as a Force ghost and told Luke the rest of the truth about Leia, about the circumstances of their birth, about why everything had been kept hidden, about what the stakes were. He told Luke that Vader was more machine than man, twisted and evil. He told him that the Emperor must be confronted. He told him that if he would not fight and kill Vader, then there was another who could. Luke put Obi-Wan's words aside and followed what he felt in himself. What he felt was that his father was worth reaching for, that the attempt had to be made, that to destroy Vader without trying to find Anakin first was to agree that Anakin was already gone. And Luke refused that agreement. He surrendered to the Empire on Endor. He walked into an Imperial shuttle with his hands up and told the stormtroopers to take him to Darth Vader. And they did. The conversation between them before the Emperor's throne room is one of the most quietly devastating exchanges in the entire story of this family. Luke told his father that he could feel the conflict in him, that the dark side was not his father completely, that Anakin Skywalker was still somewhere inside. Vader listened. He did not dismiss it in the way a completely certain man dismisses something false. He listened in the way that someone listens when the thing being said is arriving at a frequency they have not heard in a long time, and the receiving apparatus is partly broken but not entirely silent. He told Luke it was too late for him. He said this quietly. He said his son did not know the power of the dark side. He said that the Emperor would show Luke the true nature of the Force. He said all the things that Vader was supposed to say, the lines of the role he had played for 20 years. And underneath them, felt clearly by Luke, even if not audible to anyone else, was something that had no line, something that had no scripted response, something that a father feels when his child tells him that they have not given up on him, that they believe he can still be something other than what he has been. He brought Luke to the Emperor. He stood there while Palpatine tried to seduce his son toward the dark side through despair, through the certainty of the rebellion's defeat, through the presentation of what appeared to be absolute hopelessness in the form of a fleet gathering in orbit. Luke refused. He refused calmly, and then less calmly as the situation deteriorated, and the Emperor began to use the Force against him. Lightning from the old man's hands, pale and searing and relentless, the dark side weaponized into something that simply killed because it wanted to. Luke screamed, and he called for his father, not for Darth Vader, for his father. Vader looked at his son on the floor. He looked at the Emperor. He looked at his son again. And whatever the calculation was, whatever process happened in the seconds that followed, it did not take long. He reached for Palpatine. He lifted the Emperor with his one remaining fully functional arm. This ancient and powerful man who had engineered everything, who had set in motion every event that had led to this moment from decades before it began, who had built the Empire and the war and the armor and the leash inside the armor. And he carried him to the shaft at the center of the throne room, and he threw him in. Palpatine screamed on the way down and released everything he had left in a burst of dark side energy, and it tore through Vader as it discharged, through the suit and through whatever remained of the man inside the suit. The suit began to fail. Vader fell. He collapsed near the shaft, next to the place where Palpatine had gone, and he lay there while the ship began to come apart around him, because without Palpatine, the battle above Endor had no more center, and the Empire began to collapse along with everything else. Luke came to him. Luke would not leave without him. He dragged his father toward an exit, toward a shuttle, toward any possible way out of a ship that was dying. Vader stopped him. He told Luke he needed to look at him with his own eyes, not through the lenses of the mask. He asked Luke to take off his helmet. Luke did not want to. He said it would kill him. Vader said that nothing could stop that now. He said that just for once, let him look on his son with his own eyes. And so, Luke took the helmet off. There is a face underneath the mask. Not the face that burned on Mustafar. Not the destroyed thing that the suit had been keeping barely functioning for 20 years. A face that has aged, that has been through everything that the decades inside the armor contained, that carries all of it in the lines and the pallor and the damage of a body that has been maintained by technology rather than health for longer than most people live. But a face, human, present, eyes that can look at Luke directly, without electronics between them, without the mediation of a machine. Anakin Skywalker's eyes, looking at his son. He told Luke that he was right. He said that Anakin Skywalker had been in there, and that Luke had been right about that, and that his son had saved him. He said it as a father says something they mean with the last portion of themselves that is capable of meaning anything. He said it with everything that was left. He told Luke to tell his sister that he had been right. And then he died. The ship was still collapsing around Luke when he carried the armor off the shuttle and built a pyre on the forest moon and stood alone in the firelight while Darth Vader's armor burned. He was crying. He stood there in the dark of the forest with the distant sounds of celebration coming through the trees, and he watched the fire consume the black armor, the suit that had kept his father alive and kept his father imprisoned and contained 20 years of loss and service, and the buried living thing that had managed to survive all of it. He watched it burn. In the Force, in the gathering where Obi-Wan and Yoda appeared to Luke at the celebration, there was a third figure, Anakin Skywalker, as he had been before Mustafar, young and unburned and at peace, standing beside his master and his master's master, no longer separate from them, no longer the exile that his crimes and his choices had made him for so long. Present, returned, whole in the way that the Force allows wholeness to those who have come back to it fully, at whatever cost and by whatever road. This is the ending. This is the point the story arrives at after everything. And it is a good ending, in the sense that endings can be good when they resolve a tension that has been building for a very long time and give the resolution the weight it has earned. Anakin Skywalker came back. He threw the Emperor into a shaft and saved his son and died as himself, as the man the Force had breathed into existence for exactly this purpose. But here is what the ending does not resolve. Here is what sits in the finished story like a stone in still water. The redemption of Anakin Skywalker does not undo what he did. The love for Luke that moved him to act in that throne room does not reach backward through time to the children in the Jedi Temple. The peace he found in death does not restore Alderaan or the people on it, does not put back together the lives the Empire destroyed in the decades he served it, does not return to life the Jedi he hunted across the galaxy. The survivors who had already endured Order 66, and then found Vader at their door. Redemption is real. Redemption is something. But it is not the same thing as the absence of the harm that preceded it. This is the specific heartbreak of Anakin Skywalker that distinguishes his story from simpler tragedies. He did not simply suffer, he caused suffering. He was not only a victim of manipulation and circumstance, and a love the Jedi could not accommodate. He was also a perpetrator of things that do not get softened by being explained. The tragedy operates on two levels at once, the personal and the moral, and they do not resolve each other. His story breaks your heart because of what was done to him, and because of what he became, and because those two facts coexist permanently in the same narrative without one erasing the other. The Force had breathed him into existence for balance. The balance cost everything. It cost him his mother, and his wife, and his years, and his body, and his name, and eventually his life. It cost the Jedi Order the lives of every knight and master and child who was in the temple when the 501st arrived. It cost the galaxy, the Republic, and however many lives a war of that scale consumes. The balance was achieved. The Sith were destroyed. The Chosen One fulfilled his purpose, in the way that purposes get fulfilled when they have been allowed to move through a person rather than around them. When the vessel has been broken and rebuilt and broken again until finally it is capable of carrying what it was always meant to carry. What does it mean to have been the Chosen One? If you follow Anakin Skywalker from the beginning, from the desert, from the slave quarters, from the moment a dying Jedi pressed a child into the arms of a young man who had not asked for him and made him promise, and you follow him through every step that came after, the training and the love and the war and the massacres and the armor and the silence and the sun and the choice in the throne room and the fire on the forest moon, you are following the story of a being who was used by something much larger than himself for a purpose he was never fully told about and never could have consented to. He was the instrument of the Force. He was the mechanism through which a cosmic imbalance was corrected. He was, from the very moment of his miraculous conception, a tool for something larger than any individual life. And he was also just a person. That is the thing. He was a person who wanted his mother to be safe, and who wanted to learn to fly, and who fell in love with a woman and built things out of spare parts and was afraid of losing people and could never quite stop feeling everything at the very highest possible intensity. He was a person, and the galaxy, and the Force, and the ancient machinery of prophecy and balance took that person and put him through things that ground him down and broke him apart and rebuilt him in the shape of something terrible, and then used what he had been broken into to achieve what the prophecy required, and then let what remained emerge from the wreckage at the last possible moment, just in time to save his son, just in time to die as himself. There is a version of this story where you call it a happy ending. The Emperor is dead. The Sith are destroyed. Balance is restored. The sun is saved. Anakin Skywalker is redeemed. The Force Ghost stands in the firelight. You could call it a happy ending and not be entirely wrong. There is also a version where you sit with it long enough, where you go back to the beginning, back to the desert and the slave quarters and the two sons and the 9-year-old boy who loved his mother and dreamed of the stars. And you think about everything that was required, everything that was consumed, every person who suffered and every life that was ended, and every version of Anakin Skywalker that could have existed in different circumstances, who might have grown up free, who might have been trained by people who understood what he needed, who might have been loved without being weaponized, who might have grown old alongside Padme in some quiet corner of the galaxy where the politics did not reach, where the prophecy did not require him, where he could simply have been a person. That version could not exist. The galaxy did not offer it. The Force did not offer it. The story was never going to be that version. But knowing it was never going to be, that does not stop you from wanting it. Does not stop you from feeling the weight of every step between that small boy on Tatooine and the burning armor on the forest moon. Does not stop you from carrying the knowledge of how much was lost between the beginning and the ending. How many people, how much time, how much of Anakin Skywalker himself. He was the chosen one. He was born for a purpose larger than himself. And he fulfilled that purpose, and it cost him almost everything he ever was. He loved beyond what the framework he was given could hold. He grieved beyond what he had been taught to survive. He fell in the most complete and catastrophic way a person can fall, into darkness so total that the people who loved him most believed for years that he was gone. And then, at the very end, with his son looking at him and asking him to come back, he came back. What was left of him came back, and it was enough. It was barely enough, but it was enough. That is the lore of Anakin Skywalker. That is the shape of his whole story from the beginning to the end. A boy born of nothing and given everything and made to pay for it in ways that no prophecy and no force of nature and no ancient purpose can fully justify. A man who fell further than anyone thought possible and returned from further than anyone thought possible. A father who saved his son with the last thing he had to give. A chosen one who finally, in the last moments he had, chose something of his own. It is heartbreaking. It is completely, thoroughly, irreducibly heartbreaking. And it is the greatest story the galaxy ever told. To understand the full scope of what the Empire years meant, you have to understand what the galaxy looked like in their aftermath. Billions of people lived under the Imperial flag, and many of them did not think of themselves as living under oppression. They thought of themselves as living under order. The chaos of the Clone Wars had been real. The fear had been real. The relief when a strong central authority promised stability was real. Palpatine had understood this with the precision of someone who had spent decades studying how power actually moves through populations. He knew that people who are frightened enough will accept almost anything that presents itself as the alternative to fear. And so the Empire had citizens who believed in it, soldiers who fought for it with genuine conviction, functionaries who administered it with genuine efficiency, and only gradually, over years, did the full nature of what they were part of become undeniable. Vader existed inside this structure as something that defied the ordinary categories of loyalty and service. He was not loyal to the Empire in the way that an officer is loyal to an institution. He was not serving out of conviction or idealism or any belief that what he was doing was right. He was serving because Palpatine had made that the only available option. And because whatever had been left of him after Mustafar did not have the resources to construct an alternative. He enforced. He threatened. He appeared where order was breaking down and restored it through methods that could not be described as anything other than what they were. He was extraordinarily efficient at this. There was a particular quality to the kind of effectiveness that comes from a person who no longer has anything to protect in themselves, who operates without the friction of caring about their own survival or reputation or legacy. Vader simply did what was required. That was the whole of his relationship with the work. And yet, there were moments, documented in the accounts of those who served alongside him and survived, where something else surfaced briefly, where Vader's behavior deviated slightly from what pure service to the Emperor's will required. Small deviations, nothing large enough to constitute rebellion or even disobedience, but moments where the choice he made was fractionally different from the optimal Imperial choice, in ways that suggested the presence of something operating at a level beneath strategic calculation. Moments where a prisoner survived who might have been more efficiently eliminated. Moments where Vader paused at a door and then did not open it, when pursuing it would have been the obvious tactical decision. Moments where his attention lingered briefly on something that had no Imperial relevance and every personal one. He went back to Tatooine. There is a period in the early years of the Empire where Vader returned to that desert world, alone, under circumstances that were never fully explained or accounted for in any official Imperial record. He went back to the Lars homestead, where he had last seen his mother's grave. What he did there, how long he stayed, what thoughts were available to him in that particular place, none of this is recorded. But he went. That is the fact. The most feared man in the galaxy returned to the desert where everything had begun and stood at his mother's grave and was there in whatever way he was capable of being. Anywhere. Inside that suit, inside that armor, inside the life that had replaced the life that had been his. The grave in the desert, the twin suns, the sand. He had hated the sand once, had said so with the artless directness of someone very young and very much in love, had said it in a meadow on Naboo with Padme laughing beside him, that he hated sand because it was rough and coarse and irritating and got everywhere, and everything here was soft and smooth. He had been 20 years old and in love and trying to make someone laugh. He had been Anakin Skywalker. He had been alive in all the ways that matter. And the sand was still there. It had not changed. The desert had not changed. Only everything else had changed. There were places in the Empire where resistance was not just military but cultural, where the idea of the old Republic and what it had stood for was kept alive in small, quiet ways by people who believed that what had been lost could be recovered. Bail Organa of Alderaan was the architect of much of this. He had been a senator, one of the most respected voices in the Republic, and he had watched it die from the inside when Palpatine declared the Empire, had sat in that Senate chamber and seen the moment clearly for what it was, while the crowd around him cheered. He had worked from that day forward, carefully and quietly, and at enormous personal risk, to create the conditions in which the Republic's destruction might eventually be reversed. His adopted daughter grew up knowing this about herself. Leia Organa was not simply a princess of Alderaan. She was a mission. She had been given to Bail Organa and his wife to be raised with the explicit understanding that she would one day serve a purpose beyond the ordinary purposes of political life. She did not resent this. She embraced it with the particular intensity of someone who has been given both a cause and the capacity to serve it. She was, by the time she was a teenager, already one of the most effective political operatives in the Empire's nominal Senate, using her position as a cover for her work with the rebellion, smuggling intelligence and resources, and hope to people who had started to believe that hope was a luxury the galaxy could no longer afford. She was Vader's daughter. She did not know this. He did not know this. Not at first. When he interrogated her on his Star Destroyer after capturing her above Tatooine, he was not sensing a connection in the Force that would have told him anything so specific. He was encountering someone who refused to be broken and finding her impressive and infuriating in approximately equal measure. She looked him in the mask, and she did not flinch. Whatever she felt inside, and she must have felt fear, because she was human and he was terrifying. She did not show him the fear. She showed him something else. Defiance, yes, but also something quieter. A quality of absolute certainty about who she was and what she was willing to endure in the service of what she believed. He tortured her. He used Imperial interrogation methods against her. And she held. He did not know, because he could not have known from the way the Force tends to work in these situations, that the quality she showed him was a thing she had inherited, that the absolute refusal to show fear to power, the willingness to endure pain rather than compromise what she believed in, was a characteristic that had also belonged to a young pilot who had been a slave on a desert world and had chosen to leave everything he knew for a chance at something larger. The daughter of Anakin Skywalker stood before Darth Vader and showed him his own courage without either of them having any idea that was what was happening. The year between the Battle of Yavin and the battle over the Hoth system was a year in which Vader's pursuit of the rebellion became, in retrospect, something beyond ordinary military strategy. He committed resources to it that Palpatine considered excessive. He prioritized the search in ways that an objective Imperial strategist would have questioned. And what he was looking for, the thread he was following through every lead and every informant and every piece of intercepted rebel communication, was Luke Skywalker. He had identified the pilot. He had confirmed the name. He was not going to stop until he found the person that name belonged to. The years had taught Vader many things. One of them was patience. He had learned patience the hard way through the particular discipline of living in armor that required him to function with absolute physical control at all times, through decades of service that demanded he set aside everything personal and operate as an instrument. But this patience was different from the patience he applied to Imperial operations. This was the patience of waiting for something that he did not know how to want without the wanting being dangerous. He could not want a son. He could not afford to want a son. Wanting implied the possibility of loss. And he had made a settlement with himself about loss, had decided in the years after Mustafar that the capacity for that kind of loss was something he was no longer willing to carry. And then there was Luke Skywalker, and the settlement broke. When they finally met on Bespin, Vader had arranged everything. He had used Luke's friends as bait, which was the kind of tactical decision that Anakin Skywalker would also have made and would also have hated himself for making. He had understood, because he knew how to read a Force connection at this point, that Luke would come for his friends, that he would come regardless of whether it was wise or whether he was ready, because Luke Skywalker was his father's son in this, as in everything. You do not let the people you love go into danger alone. That is not a rule you follow. That is a thing you simply are. The carbon freezing chamber filled with steam, and there they were. The sound of Vader's breathing filling the space between them, Luke holding his lightsaber in the stance that Yoda had tried to teach him, which was technically correct, and which was being executed with far more raw power than technical training had produced. Vader reading that power, recognizing it, feeling it pull at something in him that he was not equipped to name in the moment, and could not have articulated if he had tried. They fought for a long time before Vader began to understand that he was not trying to win. Not in the conventional sense. He could have ended it earlier. His superiority in experience and physical capability, even diminished as his body was by everything the armor represented, was real and significant. He could have made this faster, but he was testing something. He was measuring the young man across the blade from him in the way that you measure someone you are trying to understand, not defeat. He was finding out who Luke Skywalker was. He was looking at his son. When it was over, when Luke was hanging above the shaft with one hand gone, and the revelation settling into everything, Vader extended his hand. Not the weapon, the hand, the offer. He said they could rule the galaxy together as father and son. And Luke looked at him, this young man who had just had his hand cut off and been told that the person who had done it was his father, and he chose to fall rather than take the offer. He let go. He fell into the open air of a gas giant's atmosphere rather than take his father's hand. And Vader stood above the shaft, and the offer was not answered, and the son was gone. Something in that moment, in the refusal, in watching his son fall rather than accept what he was offering, must have worked on Vader in the long period that followed. He had offered the galaxy. He had offered power and proximity and the end of the fight. He had framed it as destiny. And Luke had said no. Not because Luke was strong enough to overpower Darth Vader, but because Luke would rather fall than become something that hurt the people he loved. That refusal, that particular shape of courage, was something that Vader had once possessed himself and had believed destroyed. It was not destroyed. It was standing in front of him on a bridge in Cloud City, refusing to take his hand. The year between Bespin and Endor was a year in which Vader sat with that knowledge in whatever way he was capable of sitting with anything. He could not act on it openly. He could not turn to Palpatine and announce that things had changed. He could not reach toward Luke without the Emperor seeing it and understanding it and using it as Palpatine used everything. He served as he always had, and he waited as he had learned to do. And he carried the knowledge of his son the way he had always carried the heaviest things, without showing it, without letting it surface where it could be used against him. Luke came to Endor. He surrendered. He told the stormtroopers to take him to Darth Vader, and they stood together, finally, in something that was not combat, in a room where the full truth of what they were to each other was present to both of them, without mediation or pretense. Luke said he could feel the good still in him. He said that with a calm that was extraordinary in the circumstances. That was the calm of someone who has located something true and is simply stating it without requiring confirmation. He said that Vader had not given himself over to the dark side completely, that he should come back with him. And Vader said what he had to say, the words of Darth Vader, that the role required, about the dark side's power, about inevitability, about there being no way back. And underneath the words, pressing against the inside of the mask from a direction that had no name, something was answering Luke in a language that had no sound. He brought his son to the Emperor, and he stood there, while the old man applied everything he had to breaking Luke the way he had broken everything else. And Luke did not break. He refused the path of anger. He refused to be turned by fear. He refused to give in even when the lightning started, even when the pain was total and there was no tactical path out, and the rational response to an impossible situation was to yield. He called for his father, not for Vader. for his father. Vader looked at the Emperor. He looked at Luke. He made no announcement. He offered no speech. He simply moved. He picked up the Emperor of the Galaxy in one arm and walked to the reactor shaft and dropped him into it. And whatever Palpatine was, whatever power lived in him, went down into that shaft and did not come back, and Vader fell. The lightning had torn through the suit. The systems that kept Anakin Skywalker alive were failing. Luke came to him and tried to drag him towards safety, toward a shuttle, toward any possible escape from the ship that was dying around them. And Vader told him to take off the helmet. He said, "Let me look at you with my own eyes." Luke took off the helmet, and for the first time in 20 years, without the lenses of the mask between them, a father saw his son. He was not afraid. Whatever was on Vader's face under the helmet, whatever the years and the suit had made of the face that had once belonged to a boy in a desert, it was not afraid. It was present. It was looking at something that mattered in the way that only a very few things in a life can matter. The small number of things that you would undo everything for, if undoing were available, that you would rebuild yourself from the ground up to be worthy of. He looked at his son. He said his son had been right. He said he knew it now, and he had always known some version of it even when he could not reach it. He told Luke to tell his sister. And then the life in the system that had kept him alive for 20 years finished failing, and he died. He died on a shuttle floor on a ship falling out of the sky, with his son kneeling beside him, which was not a bad place to die, not compared to the alternatives that had seemed possible for so many years, not compared to dying as Vader. He died as Anakin Skywalker. That is the fact that the story insists on. Whatever else is true, whatever the scale of the harm, and however much of it cannot be repaired, the last moment was his own. The last choice was his own. The name he died as was his own. That matters. It does not undo the weight of everything that came before it, but it matters. In the Force, on the edge of the celebration at Endor, he appeared to Luke as a young man, as the person he had been before the fire, before the armor, before everything that had been done to him and that he had done. The Jedi who had trained him appeared with him, and the three of them stood together in the light of the forest, at peace in a way that the living versions of all three of them had rarely, if ever, been. There is a version of the Force's mercy available to those who have found their way back. Whatever they carried and whatever they cost others, the Force receives them fully when they return. The accounting is not forgotten. But what returns is not held at arm's length. This is the end that Anakin Skywalker arrived at, not the end he deserved in any simple moral calculus. The end he actually arrived at, the one the story actually gave him. It was a better end than the alternative, which would have been Vader continuing to serve until something killed him, dying in the armor with nothing looking back. Instead, there was his son's face. Instead, there was a moment of recognition. Instead, there was, at the very last, something real. The law of Anakin Skywalker is heartbreaking because it refuses to be only one thing. It refuses to be simply the story of a villain or simply the story of a hero. It refuses to let you hate him cleanly or love him without qualification. It puts the atrocities alongside the grief, and the grief alongside the love, and the love alongside the prophecy, and the prophecy alongside the small boy who built a droid from spare parts and dreamed of flying among the stars. And it says, all of this is the same person. All of this is Anakin Skywalker. The slave and the Jedi and the husband and the murderer and the Dark Lord and the father and the man who came back. One person, one life, one story that holds more than any single story should reasonably be asked to hold. And every time you go back to the beginning, back to the desert, back to the twin suns and the promise made to a mother who died waiting for her son to return, it hits differently because you know where it is going. You know every step. You know the cost. You know what is waiting at the end of that hopeful beginning, what the galaxy and the Force and the long, patient malice of a man in a Senate office have prepared for that child. And you watch him leave anyway, full of hope. And the watching breaks, something that keeps breaking every time. That is the lore of Anakin Skywalker. That is what it is, fully and without reduction.